They called her infertile, as if it were a stain she had chosen to wear, as if the word itself explained everything they hated about her. And on the day her family sent her away to the rancher, they laughed as though they were delivering a punchline instead of a human being. A quiet woman named Eliza Hartwell, who had learned, over 27 years of living under her parents' roof, how to make herself smaller so others would feel larger. The joke began years earlier, whispered first by an aunt at a holiday table, then repeated by cousins, then spoken plainly by her mother in moments of disappointment. What kind of woman can't give her husband a child? Eliza had never even been married, but that didn't matter. The town doctor had once shrugged and said there might be complications, and from that moment on, her fate was sealed by rumor rather than truth. Her younger sisters married well, their bellies swelling with promise, their names spoken with pride in church pews, while Eliza remained behind, useful only as unpaid help, a shadow moving between kitchen and barn, listening to laughter that sharpened itself on her silence. So when her father announced one evening, over stew that had gone cold in her bowl, that a rancher out west needed a woman to help around his property, and that Eliza would be going, it was framed as generosity, as opportunity, though everyone at the table understood the real intent. "He's a lonely man," her brother said, smirking. "Maybe you'll finally be of some use." Her mother did not look at her. Eliza said nothing. She had learned that words never protected her. They only invited new wounds. The rancher's name was Caleb Moore, a man spoken of with a mixture of curiosity and caution. He lived miles from town, beyond the last stretch of road, where neighbors waved and gossip still traveled fast. People said his wife had died years ago, that the land had hardened him, that he needed a woman, but not in the way men usually did. "Perfect for you," her cousin joked, pressing a bundle of clothes into Eliza's arms the morning she left. There was no farewell, no embrace, only the sound of the wagon wheels crunching against dirt as Eliza climbed aboard and sat stiffly between her father and a hired driver who never once met her eyes. She watched the house shrink behind them, watched the fields she had worked since childhood disappear, and felt something unexpected rise in her chest, not sorrow, but relief. Shame had weighed on her for so long that being cast out felt almost like permission to breathe. The journey took most of the day. The land widened, the sky stretched, and silence replaced the constant noise of judgment she had grown used to. When they finally reached the ranch, Eliza saw a weathered house standing alone against the horizon, surrounded by tall grass that moved like water in the wind. Caleb Moore stood near the fence, hat low over his brow, posture steady, neither eager nor dismissive. He looked at Eliza the way one looks at a fact, without embellishment, without cruelty. Her father spoke quickly, explaining the arrangement, emphasizing Eliza's usefulness, her obedience, the absence of expectations. Caleb listened, then nodded once. "She'll have a room," he said, "and work if she wants it." That was all. No joke, no laughter. Eliza felt her throat tighten at the simple dignity of being spoken about as if she were capable of choice. Life on the ranch unfolded slowly, deliberately, as though time itself moved differently there. Eliza rose with the sun, learned the rhythms of the land, fed animals, repaired fences. You cooked meals that were eaten in silence but not in hostility. Caleb never pried, never asked about her past, never spoke of her future as if it were something already decided. At night, she lay in a narrow bed beneath a quilt that smelled faintly of cedar, listening to the wind and realizing how loud peace could be. Weeks passed, then months. Letters from home never came, and she did not write any herself. The absence felt final but not painful. For the first time, she belonged to herself. The town's cruelty had taught Eliza to distrust kindness, so when Caleb showed it quietly, without announcement, it took her time to recognize it for what it was. He left extra food on the table when he noticed she ate little. He repaired her boots without being asked. Once when she fell ill, he sat outside her door and read aloud from an old book until the fever broke. He never crossed a boundary, never treated her as a burden or a joke. In his presence, Eliza felt something unfamiliar forming inside her. Something fragile and dangerous, hope. Not the loud, foolish kind she had learned to mock in others, but a cautious belief that life might still hold room for her, even if it looked nothing like what she had once imagined. The seasons changed, and with them, Eliza changed too. Her shoulders straightened. Her voice, when she used it, no longer trembled. She laughed once, softly, surprised by the sound, and Caleb looked up from his work, startled, then smiled as if witnessing something rare. There was no declaration of love, no dramatic moment where loneliness suddenly transformed into romance. Instead, there were small, accumulated moments, shared glances, comfortable silences, a growing sense of partnership that felt earned rather than imposed. Eliza did not think of herself as infertile out there on the ranch. The word had no meaning in the open air, among animals and soil and sky. She thought of herself simply as alive. And yet, far away, her family spoke of her often, though not with concern. They told the story at gatherings, embellishing it each time. How Eliza had been sent off as a joke, how she would surely fail, how some people were simply born useless. The laughter that followed was sharp and confident, the laughter of those who believed themselves safe from consequence. They never imagined that the land they had discarded her onto would give her something they never could, a chance to be seen, to be valued, to begin again. Nor did they imagine that one day Eliza Hartwell would return, not broken, not ashamed, but carrying proof that their cruelty had not been the final word. Eliza did not know the exact day her life crossed the invisible line from survival into destiny, only that one morning she woke before dawn with a strange stillness inside her body, a quiet unlike any she had known. And as she lay there listening to the ranch breathe, around her the soft creak of wood, the distant low of cattle, the wind brushing against the walls, she placed a hand on her stomach without knowing why, feeling both foolish and afraid. And in that moment, a memory surfaced of every cruel word ever spoken about her, every joke sharpened at her expense, every certainty her family had carried about what she could never be. And the weight of those memories pressed so hard that she sat up, heart pounding, because somewhere beneath the fear there was also something else, something fragile and luminous, like a candle refusing to go out. The weeks that followed were filled with uncertainty, with small changes she tried to dismiss, fatigue that lingered, a sudden aversion to foods she once loved, emotions that rose and fell. Without warning, but denial had been her armor for too long, and she knew better than to trust it. When she finally told Caleb, her voice barely above a whisper, he did not react the way men in her family would have, with disbelief or accusation or laughter. Instead, he listened, really listened, then asked only one question, spoken carefully, as though the answer mattered beyond measure. "What do you want, Eliza?" No one had ever asked her that before. Not her parents, not her siblings, not the town that had labeled her defective and moved on. She told him the truth, haltingly, that she was terrified, that she had been told her whole life this was impossible, that she didn't know how to carry something so precious in a world that had taught her she was disposable. Caleb nodded, as if fear were an expected guest rather than a weakness, and said simply, "Then we'll do this your way." In those words, Eliza felt the final thread tying her to her old life loosen, not with pain but with grace. The months unfolded with a tenderness she had never known, each day marked not by dread but by cautious joy. The ranch seemed to conspire with her, offering gentle mornings and forgiving afternoons. And though her body changed, it did so without shame. Caleb adjusted the work without comment, stepping in when tasks grew too heavy, always careful never to make her feel fragile or incapable. At night, when sleep escaped her, he sat nearby, sometimes speaking of nothing at all, sometimes of his late wife, whose memory no longer haunted him but rested peacefully in the past, making room rather than demanding loyalty. Eliza learned that love did not always announce itself with fire or desperation. Sometimes it arrived quietly, like rain soaking into dry ground, unnoticed until everything began to grow. When the child came into the world, it was at dawn, the sky just beginning to soften with light, and Eliza cried, not from pain, but from the overwhelming realization that she had done something no one believed she could, something no insult could erase. She held the baby against her chest, feeling a fierce, protective joy that made the past seem distant and small. And when Caleb knelt beside her, tears in his eyes, she understood that family was not something you inherited. It was something you built, choice by choice, act by act. News travels faster than compassion, and it did not take long for word to reach the town Eliza had left behind. At first it came as rumor, carried by a trader who mentioned seeing a woman at Moore's ranch with a child in her arms. Then as certainty when someone recognized her name and realized the joke had turned against its tellers. Her family reacted with disbelief, then outrage, then a sudden, self-serving affection that felt more insulting than the cruelty ever had. Letters arrived, clumsy with false concern, invitations disguised as apologies, each one trying to rewrite the past as misunderstanding rather than malice. Eliza read them slowly, feeling no urge to respond, until one final message arrived, written in her mother's familiar hand, demanding she come home and explain herself, as though explanation were owed. That was the letter Eliza folded carefully and placed beneath the lamp, deciding at last that silence was no longer enough. She would return, not to seek approval, not to prove worth, but to close a chapter that had been left open far too long. The journey back felt nothing like the one that had carried her away. This time, Eliza sat upright, her child sleeping against her, Caleb beside her not as an escort, but as a partner. And when the familiar landscape appeared on the horizon, she felt neither fear nor longing, only a calm resolve. The family gathered as if for spectacle, faces arranged into practiced expressions of shock and forced warmth. But Eliza did not rush to fill the space with explanations. She let the silence work, let the sight of the child speak for itself. Her father stammered, her sisters stared, her brother's smirk faltered and vanished. Someone finally laughed uncertainly, as if hoping the old rules still applied. But the sound died quickly, exposed and weak. Eliza spoke then, her voice steady, telling them not a story of revenge, but of truth, how words had shaped her, how cruelty had followed her like a shadow, how being sent away as a joke had become the greatest gift they had ever given her, because it freed her from the need to be anything they approved of. She did not raise her voice, did not accuse, did not ask for forgiveness or offer it. She simply stated who she was now, and in doing so, removed their power to define her. When Eliza left again, there were no attempts to stop. No dramatic pleas, only the quiet understanding that something irreversible had occurred. She returned to the ranch with a lightness she had never felt before, knowing that the past no longer owned any part of her future. The child grew surrounded by land and love, by stories told without bitterness, by laughter that healed rather than harmed. Eliza sometimes thought of the girl she had been, the one who believed, herself broken, who accepted ridicule as truth, and felt a deep compassion for her. A promise whispered across time that suffering would not be the end of her story. If this journey has moved you, if you believe in second chances, quiet strength, and the kind of justice that arrives not with punishment but with transformation,